Hello, I figured I'd do a little intro on this one. I am currently trying to find a job, and so my friend Max decided to join me to kind of demo a mock system design interview. And we did this on stream, but I've cut the actual interview portion out and put it into the video after this. Um, and kind of just to show you how these sorts of things actually work. So Max and I work together at Lyft, and we've conducted hundreds of these interviews ourselves. And so this is kind of a good example of how they actually go in reality. If you stick around to the end, there's a little bit of back and forth where we kind of analyze how it went. So you can see like how somebody would grade one of these as well. So hopefully this is useful. I know this is kind of an interview type that they don't really talk so much about, and honestly, I didn't really get experience in this interview type until I started, you know, actually interviewing other people with questions similar to this, and so um, it might not be one that you can easily study for. But anyway, here's an example. Hopefully you'll enjoy it, and I'll see you at the end or in the next video. Bye. Okay. We should have my friend Max on stream now. Okay, there we go. Okay, we should be good to go. It's
Sweet.
12:13, so that'll give us an hour.
Okay, cool. Let's see.
Is this still a good time to do an interview?
I actually, before we start, I had a different interview that I did once where it was just a coding interview, and I asked the question, and the candidate thought for a minute, and then he goes, "Okay, I understand. Can I please use the restroom?" And I'm like, I didn't say no, so he went, and then when he came back, he completely murdered my question. Just got the optimal answer super fast, explained it all, and I had no idea what to do. So, either he was great, or he knew that either he's a really good candidate, or he knew the answer already, or he cheated.
Yeah.
And if he cheated, then that's not good. So yeah, now I always ask right away for the first question I ask is, do you need to use the restroom? And then if they do go, I ask them to leave their phone.
Perfect. Yeah, that's yeah. I always lead with, "Is this still a good time to conduct an interview?" and then go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Well, yeah, let's get started. So, yeah, my name is Max. I'll be conducting your interview today. Um, Let me just tell you a little bit about myself. I work on the I don't know. I don't know if I should dox myself. I think people can kind of figure out who I am, but I'll just say I'm a tech lead on a team that is very critical to what my company does, and we, my job is writing code, setting the roadmap, optimizing systems, and so on. Can you tell me just very briefly about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Anthony. I originally started as a front-end engineer, doing front-end code. I transitioned to more of a full-stack engineer when I realized that it was really difficult to get front-end work done by myself. As a full-stack engineer, I recognized that there were a bunch of problems with building systems. This was when I worked at Yelp. With building systems in a scalable manner. Basically, we were working in a monolithic code base, and deploys ended up getting difficult. So I transitioned. I proposed to my manager at the time that we should create a developer productivity team, and that got pitched all the way up to the VP, and they gave us headcount to build a team that was a developer productivity team. That team was called WebCore, and that's where I really kind of learned my passion for developer tooling and building stuff around there. We ended up building an entire organization around developer tooling at Yelp, and then you know after Yelp, I did similar things at Lyft, where I built out a developer experience organization, originally starting at a small team of about 5 people, and grew that team to 14, split that into 3 teams, and then grew each of those teams and built out an organization. Most of the stuff that I'm passionate about is code quality and testing and those sorts of things.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Can you tell me about a past project? Maybe tell me about something that you are really proud of, or something that you led end to end. Um, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'll tell you probably the biggest project that I've ever worked on, which was a Python 3 migration. And I think like the technical points of the Python 3 migration weren't actually that interesting. Like, Python 2 and Python 3 aren't that different in programming languages. They're really a lot of syntactical changes. But the difficult part of that problem was organizing this project across hundreds of repositories and about 50 or so teams. In order to facilitate that project, we worked with executives and about 10 directors across many different organizations to get top-down buy-in on such a large-scale project, but also make sure that everyone is on board and prioritizes the work and organizes that work in such a way that we can make these sweeping changes across everyone and do it safely and successfully. And um, I was involved with a lot of the planning with that project, as well as a lot of the working with directors to get buy-in and making that project a success overall. And we were able to successfully move, I think it was 163 repositories, 141 services, and 52 teams before the 2020 end of life of CPython 2. And yeah, no small
Okay.
undertaking.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more specifically about your role? Like, what you know, could the project have been done without you? And if not, why is that?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of took two roles in this. One was, the facilitator and organizer, where I worked with a bunch of different teams, spent a lot of time on education and building out tooling and infrastructure that made all of this possible. I think that's actually the more interesting part of it. Like the harder part is, being able to bring a bunch of people together and get a bunch of work done with. Sorry, let me move your face so that I'm not constantly looking back and forth at the screen. There we go. That's a better spot. But yeah, I was involved in the facilitation and like organizing teams and educating teams and providing tooling there, and I think that was probably the most important part. But I also spent some of the time as one of the implementers. So one of the problems that we ran into is, even though we got all of these directors to prioritize this work, as it is with with project work in general, like those prioritizations slip as customer focused things come up, or other stuff as well. And so I was also a big force in the actual implementation and rollout of this. So I spent a lot of my own personal time working on other teams' repositories where I wasn't familiar with the code and kind of had to jump in, learn all of their code bases, work with their senior engineers, and schedule ways to roll this out in a safe manner. And we didn't cause any incidents. So actually, I think we caused one incident. But one
Yeah.
out of 150 is pretty good ratios.
Nice. Yeah, I have some specific knowledge about this incident. Anthony talked about it on stream, but I'll try not to break character too much. Cool. So let's jump into the technical question. So for this question, I'll describe a problem and I'll have you just outline a system to solve it. And to my knowledge, this is not anything that we ask at my employer. It's not in any documentation. So I don't think that Anthony has seen this question before, but we'll find
Not
out.
leaking any company
So,
secrets here.
yeah. So the premise of this question is, I'd like you to design a system similar to Pokemon Go. So I have not played Pokemon Go too much, but I will try to describe, I guess, the big rocks of what I want out of this system. The idea is users should have, an app on their phone. Let's say you're not designing the app; you're mostly designing the back end of it. And in the app, you should be able to walk around and find nearby Pokemon, and you should be able to capture them. Let's start with just those requirements.
Okay, cool. So some things that I like to ask before I jump into a big problem like this is I want to understand, problems of scale, as well as like what clients we're targeting, what sort of features we might look at in the future, as well as how we would organize this from a developer standpoint. As I'm mostly focused on developer experience in that kind of situation, I like to ask that first. So, like, when we're building this out as a company, what sort of uh, engineering resources are we looking at? What sort of scale from an organization are we looking at? Do we have any established patterns around microservices or that sort of thing? And what do we want to kind of build out there from an organization perspective? Is this something that I'm going to be doing all of the development for, and so like I have a little bit more freedom to organize things in the ways I want to do, or is this something where I'm going to be prescribing an architecture to a series of teams, and then we're going to, get director and etc. buy-in to build stuff out there? So what does that sort of look like from your perspective?
Yeah, so let's say we have company buy-in for this already, and it's a greenfield project. Let's say the company has a you know I don't know if this is mature or not, but let's say the company already uses microservices. They already have a development environment. They have CI/CD.
Mm-hmm.
I'm mostly trying to understand how you would structure the necessary services, what APIs we would need, what databases we would need, things like that. And I guess this design would eventually, be split up into at most, let's say 50 engineers across a few different teams. So it's not, hyper specialized sort of
Mm-hmm.
systems. I guess we're just looking to outline like what are the big blocks? What do we need? How do they communicate with each other?
Cool, sounds
Does
great.
that answer your question?
Yeah, one additional question, which is like, I assume we're going to develop this at a scale where we expect, everyone in the world to whip out their phone and spend 2 weeks solving world peace and playing Pokemon instead of, grumbling.
Yeah.
And we'll also be designing this for a pre-pandemic world where people can actually go outside.
Yeah, people can travel, they can go outside. I don't know about everyone in the world, but let's say, millions of active users,
Mm-hmm.
and people would potentially cluster together. If there's like, oh, like some really rare Pokemon is somewhere, you could have hundreds of people, maybe 1,000 if it's safe. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't played much Pokemon Go. You could
Okay.
have like a ton of people that might actually want to, capture a specific Pokemon in an area.
Cool, yeah. So, a couple of things that I noticed about this problem that makes it perhaps a little bit easier is because it's location based, we can do some tricks around, uh, partitioning our actual infrastructure. So, like things like multi cloud or multi data center or multi region are going to be things that we can approach here because, if I have my phone out and I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, for instance, and I'm poking around on Pokemon Go, I can connect directly to a local server, and I don't need to go to like a server in California. And this will provide like better latency and other stuff around that. So I'm gonna try and think about that as part of my design. However, I'm probably gonna start with the simplest thing first, which is just like one server, and then talk about how I can scale it up from there.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about our models first. I usually like to start with models because they are, how I want to think about the data and how I want to piece all the things together. Oh, actually, let me double check that this is actually recording. Okay, yeah, we're good. So I think the first model that we're going to talk about is the user, and I'm going to hopefully abstract away a lot of the login because I don't think building a login system is actually all that interesting. But we're going to assume
Yeah.
that we have some
And
sort
then
of
already this exists. Sure.
perfect, yeah. We're gonna assume
Yeah.
we have some sort of user. I think we're going to give them a primary location. However, um, it is possible that they go traveling and so they're in some other part of the world. So so in primary location, this may be updated at some point in time. But something that gives them a general position in the world. The problem with storing location data, of course, is our good old friend GDPR and CCPA, and so you want to be very careful about the personally identifiable information here. Um, but we might use this later to select what servers they go to or something like that. Another thing that they might have is a user ID, of course, because that's not super interesting. But I don't think we actually need much more than that for our user here. Uh, we're also going to probably have some sort of entity, which is the Pokemon that they've captured. In this case, I'm probably thinking of doing a key value store just because it's pretty easy to handle in that sort of way. Where we have a captured Pokemon, which maybe has a a hash key or a composite key that's like the user ID plus the, I don't know, capture ID or something like that. Because you can have multiple of the same Pokemon. You can have, you know, 0 of a Pokemon. You can have whatever sort of stuff, and this will have like the species, the level, and the, you know, the other stuff the Pokemon have, nickname, etc. Maybe even like
So is the
some.
capture ID representative of like the session under which you captured it? Is that what you mean by capture ID?
I would probably just have this be some opaque UUID, because it doesn't really, you know,
Okay.
the actual retrieval of this doesn't really matter so much. It's just that we want
Mm-hmm.
some unique way to refer to that specific Pokemon if we need to do like, you know, battles or stuff like that.
Yeah, makes sense.
And you know, the nice thing about having the user ID and the key is you can do, you know, queries against this particular thing to collect all of the user's Pokemon. So we don't. We're kind of. I'm maybe jumping a little bit ahead and prescribing a you know, particular model for viewing this data. Like it might make more sense to do this as a relational store, but we might look at this later, and revisit
Okay.
how we match these models together. I think that's actually most of our backing data. One question, or one thing about Pokemon Go that is kind of interesting is usually when you're playing the game, a lot of people will see the same Pokemon at the same area. And so we might have another entity that represents like an appearance there, so that, you know, a player can only see a particular Pokemon once, and like that is in a region. I might think about that a little bit later, but these are the models that I think are going to be persistent. We might have some temporary data that is represented in similar models. Let's talk
Okay.
about, I
So
think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
so for finding nearby Pokemon, let's talk about sort of this. You mentioned that people might see Pokemon and then they might not see them afterwards. So let's say, just to clarify, that Pokemon are always either visible on the map to anyone who's near them, and then one person can capture them.
Yeah.
But if you see the Pokemon and then leave and then come back, it'll still be there if no one's captured it.
Okay, I mean, the way the Pokemon Go actually works is, I don't want to be like
Yeah.
that, but
Pokemon Go. Yeah.
the way it actually works is like if there's a Pokemon at a region, it'll be there for like a 30-minute period or like a 15-minute period, and any of the people there can capture that Pokemon. So it's not like exclusive. But we could design it
Okay,
either
got it.
way depending on how you want me to design it.
Yeah, let's say my version it's exclusive.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry for the confusion.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So then we need to design a system which is similar to like a checkout system where, you know, we have a group of Pokemon, and while someone is encountering a Pokemon, they have to hold like an exclusive access to that. And so we basically need the, you know, encounter of a Pokemon to be atomic. Now, building this from a user's perspective is actually going to be pretty tricky, because you don't want to really show Pokemon on a map that other people could, you know, steal from you, because it'd be a pretty
Mhm.
shitty user experience if, you know, oh, I see the rare Pokemon, and you go to click on it, it
Yeah,
says, oh, someone else has already encountered this Pokemon. Sorry. Um, so I think, you know, we can actually kind of fudge this a lot and ship a set of viewed Pokemon to a client that are unique to that client, and not actually show peered Pokemon to everyone else. Um, because, you know, there's no point in there's no point in showing people Pokemon that they can't possibly see. And so let's talk about some of the APIs that we're going to do here, and expand out how those are going to work. And this is probably going to change how our models will work as well. So one model that I
yeah.
think we're probably going to
Oh
use
wait,
here,
sorry.
or sorry, API.
Uh, yeah, sorry to interrupt. Let's say I understand what you're saying about how we shouldn't show people Pokemon that they can't capture, but for the purposes of this problem, let's have some sort of overlap where we might show an available Pokemon to multiple people, and there is some sort of uh,
Sorry,
there
here's
will be
another
some
Pokemon kind
contention.
of deal. Okay, all right, we'll
Well,
do it that way
no,
then.
there will be contention. So if you have two people that open, let's say you have like 5 people that open their app in the same area, maybe some of them would see the Pokemon, some of them wouldn't. So the ones that see the Pokemon can contend for it.
Okay.
But you only one person is going to be able to capture it at a time. So maybe one person initiates the capture step, and it's just whoever is. I didn't really outline combat or battles or anything like that, but there's some way to say like, okay, I'm going to capture it, and then you're the one who's going to capture it.
Okay, sounds good. So the first API that I'm going to kind of design here is from the client's perspective, going to see what are the available Pokemon at a particular region. So, or at a particular, probably GeoQuad. That's probably the easiest way to handle, location data. So you would have the way geoquads work. You're familiar with how geoquads work. This is more for chat. The way geoquads work is like you have a particular, I believe it's squares, although some represent them as hexagons, which will allow things, more granular positions. But basically, you hash a particular location to a two-dimensional space on a grid, and store data based on that. So let's assume that the phones can detect their own geoquad and can send that to the server. Of course, a big problem with Pokemon Go is location spoofing, and I don't think. Are you okay if I don't try and address that here? Because
Yeah,
location spoofing gets into fraud and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, I think the term is geohash.
Geohash.
I agree. No, yeah.
Okay, Yelp called them geoquads, so that's where I'm. that's
Yeah.
where I'm stuck in that. But yeah, geohashing, indeed.
I've never heard of geoquad, so maybe it is a thing. Okay.
I know Liv,
Yeah,
Liv calls them geohashes, so that's fair. Okay, so let's do an API for available Pokemon or something like this, and it's going to take an input that is our geo hash. And I think the way that I'll want to design this is kind of a lot of these available Pokemon are essentially ephemeral and they're location based. So I don't really need any persistent storage for this. I can use something like, Memcached or Redis to store a set of Pokemon that have some expiration time on them for a geohash. As part of looking them up, I can go against that storage there. Do we have nice shapes here? Can I put text in one of these? Oh, I can. Perfect. So let's say this is Redis / Memcached. We're going to be using it as like a partially persistent storage here. So the neat part about this problem is we can kind of lie to users about how persistent the data is because they won't be able to verify any of it. So like they'll see a set of Pokemon. We can keep it in our non-persistent storage because they're ephemeral. Pokemon are all ephemeral. We really only care about like if a person has captured a Pokemon, we want that data to be 100% consistent and persistent. So what I'm going to do here is kind of a little sketch of how this API would work. Where is the text box? So the first step would be, and we can kind of make these the data that we structure here kind of lazy. Like if we don't have to populate all of the data for every single geohash because maybe people aren't necessarily in all of those geohashes, and that would be extremely expensive for just continually churning processing power to populate all those geohashes. So let's first do a attempt to retrieve from memcached for the particular or from cache data. I don't really want to call it a cache data because we are actually using this as our live data from live data.
Oh, your memory DB.
Yeah, memory DB. That's a good way to put it. From memory DB. Now, of course, as soon as you introduce multiple steps here, we have problems with atomicity. So I think I know Redis has like a locking mechanism. I'm not gonna be able to Google during actual interviews, but I know Redis has like a kind of key-based locking mechanism, so we could use that potentially to enforce rights here. And so if we're able to retrieve, we can just say that retrieval is free, but we would take a lockout to write this data in a somewhat consistent fashion. Because we wouldn't want the case to be where like two clients show up, one asks for the data, doesn't get it, starts writing it, the second asks for the data, doesn't get it, starts writing it, and then they have two different world states of the world. And then as soon as they try and check in, like the Pokemon would blink in and out, and that would provide kind of a crappy user experience. So we're gonna kind of enforce some consistency here, and probably have a timed lock so that if for some reason our API server has a bug or spins forever or spends a bunch of time doing stuff that it doesn't need to do, it would time out and allow another client to access that. So some sort of timed lock against memory storage. And during this timed lock, we're going to do the following. We're going to generate a set of Pokemon. And we're going to store that in the lock. So this is if there's nothing there, or it needs a refresh. Because it's possible that we retrieve all the data and the expiry time has exhausted. We should actually talk about what the data structure of this looks like here. So we'd have expiry time, and we would have available Pokemon as some sort of list of things here. And these will have actually this can probably be a set. And I know Redis has sets, so we can do that. And this will kind of be our blob of data that we retrieve over and over. Store that in the lock. Memory TP. And so once we've done all of this, then we can just return the data. Why did this not work? Return our data. And we would filter, so the available Pokemon would be filtered based on, actually we can just delete them from this set once they're gone. Although probably when you capture a Pokemon, you probably want the number of Pokemon in a region to stay somewhat constant. Otherwise you would see big spike of Pokemon and then everyone would capture them all, and then big spike and then everyone would capture them all. So we'll probably design our completed capture as a different API here. But I think that's our retrieval. The other thing that we can do, depending on whether our memory storage has support for this, I know if you're working with Dynamo, I know Dynamo is kind of a crappy memory storage, but because it's persistent and consistent. But a lot of your memory databases also have a TTL sort of field, so you can say this chunk of data will expire based on this time. Instead of doing something like least recently used or other eviction policies. So we're going to assume that we use some sort of time-based eviction policy here. Time-based eviction policy.
So are you saying that you want to evict all the Pokemon after a specific time, or do you want to have individual Pokemon potentially expire in that area?
Oh, actually, that's a good point, because if we do time-based eviction policy, we can't really mutate this data. And that produces some interesting consisting problems. So it might make sense to do a account-based, or individual Pokemon with an individual expiry time. That makes our retrieval a lot more tricky. So maybe the available Pokemon actually has individual expiry time, and so we don't actually have a time-based eviction policy. Unless, we can do a time-based eviction policy, but we just update the overall expiry time. So we have an expiry time for all of this stuff. So if you have no access to the data at all, we can evict the entire data set. But each individual Pokemon is going to have its own expiry time. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about it that way. Individual expiry time. And I think during, if we do a retrieval and we get some expired time, we can probably, if some are expired, filter those out and trigger a background job to populate them. That way we can kind of do this out of band and we can just show the currently available Pokemon. This should keep them relatively constant. The worst case scenario is you have, you're at the tail end of a retrieval and you only see a particular set of Pokemon, and then several minutes later a bunch more appear. But I think that's an okay user experience. One thing that I didn't mention is this is kind of a heartbeat API, which can be problematic for scaling, but it's per client, and I think it's not super terrible. As the problem scales out, though, you would probably want to move to more of like a push model where updates to a particular geohash would only ping the clients that are online and in that location instead of like a client continually pulling. This would also help for disaster recovery where, you know, you don't want to bake everything into this one mega API, and so every time you're dealing with some sort of outage or scaling issue in any of your components, like this isn't a critical and self-feedback loop failure that makes it really difficult to recover. I've worked
So
with several of these systems at previous companies where centralized APIs like this make it really difficult to scale out a system and make it durable to these kind of disaster scenarios. So
got
it's a
it.
little.
So,
We're gonna go for a heartbeat for our very first approach here, if that's okay.
so for the heartbeat, the clients that are in that area would be calling this heartbeat. However, in the push-based model, you said the clients in the area would be subscribing and receiving the push. So would it be equivalent, or like I think I'm not understanding the difference.
It would be roughly equivalent, except in a disaster scenario, we could scale the push in a much more server side fashion. We can control how much data is flowing from the server, more so than we can from a client. Of course, you could always send a push to a client that says, "Hey, heartbeat less often," and then still be able to control some of that data flow there. But I find that trusting a client to heartbeat properly is often more difficult than just saying, I'm making the calls here. You'll receive the data when I tell you to receive the data. Of course, building
Right.
a
Then you
push
have to build
model.
like rate limiting or something like that to protect
Yeah,
yourself.
I mean, we would want to implement rate limiting either way because
Oh, right.
someone's going to reverse engineer our API and then use that to build large scale maps and build a community around it and then ban everyone who is part of that community. But that's I'm not salty about Pokemon Go at all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Can you clarify the, I guess, step 2A, generate a set of Pokemon? Specifically, how do we determine if you have N people in an area that only a subset of them will see certain Pokemon?
Yeah, so I think what I would do here, so this is assuming either we're doing a full, actually, this would only be a full generation step. So this is the
Got it.
first person that enters the region. And so they would generate, and I think you could always generate the same number of Pokemon in a region and then, scale that based on how large your region size is. So assuming they're small regions, they're probably, several blocks or like, the size of a park or something, and so you would probably generate a even distribution of number within there. But this would just be a full generation. I'll talk more about how we do replacement of expired Pokemon later because there's kind of two other components to this. There's this background trigger job, and there's also the time when we actually achieve a capture of a Pokemon. We also, I forgot to do the actual checkout mechanism for when we enter the battle. So I'll go over the checkout mechanism as well.
Yeah.
Because we need to say like this Pokemon is being viewed by a particular person. So actually this probably also needs, in additional to individual expiry time, we also probably need like a optional UID that's the actual person, checked out person. The person that actually has that particular Pokemon. Of course, mutating this might be a little bit tricky, but I think we can manage. Are you okay with this so far? And I can move on to one of the other APIs.
I'm still a little confused on how we determine that. We've generated all the possible Pokemon, but then we need to figure out that some people see some Pokemon and some people don't see them, even if they're in the same area.
Oh, okay. So we want people to see a subset of the Pokemon, not the entire result set.
Well, I think we talked about how it's like unfortunate if you have like a really rare Pokemon and everyone in the area sees that Pokemon and is contending for it. So I think sort of the middle ground we have is that we could generate multiple Pokemon and not actually show them to everyone there. So
Okay.
For example, if there is a rare Pokemon, then some people just won't see it, and other people will be able to contend for it. So how do we, like with this system, um, control that some people can see this Pokemon, some can't? Because all the possible available Pokemon are going to be in your data store, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't actually want to reveal that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what I would probably do for this is generate considerably more Pokemon than you would ever want to display to any one user. So, maybe a user sees 10 Pokemon at once. And so let's generate a thousand or scale that based on the number of actual users in the geohash. We can probably run some background job based on the stats to a particular geohash to figure out how we need to auto scale a particular region for a person. But let's talk about how we would select the subset from this, because I think this is just going to be like one blob select, and then we can do filtering in our API to show a particular set to users. I think the easiest way to do that, so select, let's say there's 1,000 generated for a region, and we want to show people 10. So we would select, 1,000 from our data store. And again, this isn't much data because it's essentially like a couple integers and a couple strings, and so maybe this is fits in like one read capacity unit, so it's not really one or two read capacity units, so it's not super expensive to make this kind of call. And we could so we're gonna select 1,000 of them. Then I think the easiest way to do this is do some subset hashing based on this. So we have some unique data per user, which is our user ID, and we can use that to do some sort of modular arithmetic over our 1,000 data set to select some subset of that. So maybe it's assuming the data is actually unordered, you could probably just take like generate an integer from your ID and then mod based on that number and treat it as a circular buffer and grab out a subset of that. It doesn't have to be cryptographically consistent here. We can just use some cheap hashing algorithm here. But the main point of it is to take that large chunk of data and get a consistent subset of it or consistent indexing of it. And so like for 1,000, you might have numbers 10, 110, 210, or something like that, and show just those to that user. That way, everyone in the region is going to get kind of a unique subset of those Pokemon, and some people will share some of them. You could, of course, also scale this by rarity. So if you had something that's like super rare, you might, add some additional business logic into that subset selection. I forgot to actually write this in here. So use user ID plus some hashing plus some consistent hashing / shuffling to select a subset. Consistent. Of course, when I talk about consistent hashing, I'm not referring to the normal diagram that you would use to do, allocating shards of a data store. I'm more talking about like use some algorithm that with an input of array of size n and a user ID that's some integer, some math that allows you to select a subset of that. That larger list. I know the word consistent hashing kind of evokes a certain feeling from some types of people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like you could decide like these users get the first 10 and these users get the next 10 and these users get the next 10. So that's kind of like consistent hashing, but I understand. I don't think consistent hashing is necessarily bad in this case, but I think I understand the sort of general idea where you use the ID to choose a subset.
Yeah. You're right. I could use consistent hashing here, but I think that adds a little bit of operational overhead, which is unnecessary based on the problem constraints. Like, the users don't actually care that, they have replicated data on the back end. They just want to see a subset of the Pokemon, and we have a way to consistently give them that subset. As long as our data retains the same order on the back end repeatedly.
Okay. That sounds good.
Okay, so you want to talk about... Sorry, what'd you say?
Let's talk about the next API.
Okay, so I think... I think next I want to talk about this background job, although it's not super... Okay. It's not super involved. Basically, it would be a this is probably either queued with like some notification service similar to like Kafka or SNS or something like that, where you would pub sub and say like, we publish we publish this geohash, and please repopulate these particular expired indices, and it would run that background job, take a lock similar to this, and find all of the ones that have expired and replace them with newly generated species. And the clients wouldn't really care at that point, because they're just they're just dumb retrieval mechanisms, and they can get replaced as necessary. I can go into more details there, or if you're okay with that explanation, I can move on to another API.
Yeah, I think for the MVP that sounds good. We can. I think with the background job, you might have to build some smarts to guess where to actually repopulate. Whereas with the system already, you'd be repopulating based on how active people are. So I think that's sufficient. But yeah, let's talk about the next API.
Yeah, actually, I think with the next API, I'll clarify one part of that, because I think it is actually addressed, but it's not written out, and I haven't communicated that properly. But okay, so let's talk about the next API. I think the next API that's important is the one where a user starts an encounter, and this is actually tricky because we do have a race condition with two clients trying to start the same thing at the same time, so we need some sort of way to resolve a consensus here. I think we can just do that by again utilizing locking. So API/encounter, and again we probably want to maintain our geohash just so that we can retrieve Redis in the same way as before. And this is going to be an authenticated user API. I guess every API is going to be authenticated, because what's the point of Pokemon Go if you're not logged in? And so we would take a geohash, and we would probably take some sort of Pokemon ID, and this would come from this available Pokemon model here. So again, like some ID field here. Of course, I would probably write this with an underscore here. And in this API here, what we'd again do is like we would need a lock against this storage, and two people could run the same API at the same time. We'll talk about what happens and what ordering happens there, and how we can do sort of retries or like some user experience on the client that makes it not so frustrating. Although I can already tell based on how we've designed this the behavior where two people could click on it at roughly the same time and have latency based on their actual client is going to make this a really kind of negative user experience. But that's the constraint of the problem. So we'll just have to hope the client engineers can make people not so angry, and oops, you clicked on a Pokemon that someone else captured. Here's a Pokeball for free or something like that. So
well, I don't. I understand it's frustrating. We could also essentially generate so many Pokemon that this contention is very low. But yeah, we could also talk. But yeah, let's keep going with this.
Yeah, or another way is like we don't show overlap to users. That would also solve that user experience problem as well. But yeah, let's say that we go to this. We know our geohash, so we can retrieve this blob, and so we would again make an exclusive lock against that particular key in our memory DB. So exclusive lock against value keyed by geohash, and we would probably give a particular time frame that they can complete this capture in. So we don't want somebody to check out a Pokemon and then the game crashes or something, or like they just leave their phone out, and then that data can never be collected. So we probably want some additional expiry time for like an encounter expiry time. But I'm gonna kind of gloss over that at the moment and think about it a little bit in a second, because I think it'll also come into the ending part here. And we can probably do something on the client as well that's like, you have 5 minutes to capture this Pokemon, otherwise it will be gone, blah blah blah, and kind of make it a timed mini game. Yeah, exclusive lock. We will mark the individual available Pokemon with the checked out ID. Checked out ID. This is the thing that I talked about earlier, where we, substituted in the user ID, and so this becomes it transitions from null to some user ID. That way, we know who has access to this Pokemon. Actually, that actually helps us if the game crashes. You could issue a heartbeat, figure out that you are in an encounter, and then continue a counter encounter. I know for the longest time the client was a force quit simulator for several weeks. But yeah, we mark the available Pokemon with the checked out ID, and I think that's it. This, because it has a checked out ID, it will become invisible to everyone else. But we want to talk about the failure scenarios here. Like, we want to, talk about when somebody already has this checked out. And so we can actually do this inside our exclusive lock as well. So we can say, like, if someone else checked it out, error message, and or, give the user a gift and opportunity to do something else.
Fails.
What's that?
Is that if the lock fails?
Um,
Or is that even if step 1 succeeds?
I think if the lock fails, we just issue a 500 and a retry. This is basically the scenario where, another user retrieved or checked out this Pokemon first, and their right succeeded, and then the next read afterwards either blocked a little bit and then locked, or locked and then noticed that Pokemon is now gone. So this is the case where they missed their window of opportunity to successfully become the person who's in this encounter. And
okay, so in other words, the first person is able to obtain a lock, and then if a second person should not be able to obtain the lock, right?
Right. Or it would. Yeah. So the exclusive lock is mostly for actually doing the read and write in a consistent manner to the data store. Okay. It's not like a long living lock. It's just going to live for the 100 milliseconds that they're doing the read and write, or well, it'd probably be way less than 100 milliseconds.
And you see if your checked out ID matches. Okay, I see. So this is like an atomic way to assign your checked out ID. Okay, got it.
Yep. Yeah. I'm mostly trying. Yeah. Again, as you said, I'm mostly trying to make an atomic way to say this is my Pokemon, or at least I'm in this encounter. So I think that actually satisfies this endpoint. We probably want to, we would add some necessary more logic to like the timeout here for encounter timeout. That way, this could, like, if you encounter a Pokemon 2 seconds before it would have expired, this will allow you to extend that expiry period further. And we would, again, like, have to add some more logic here in our retrieval. But it's not too much more complicated. It's just, like, checking another expiry time. And we would also add some additional, idea here that, like, if your encounter timeout times out and the Pokemon gets deleted, when we actually go to the capture API, which we'll get to next, that will handle, somebody trying to capture a Pokemon that they either haven't checked out or the encounter timeout has expired, and provide error cases there. So are you okay if I jump to the last API that I think is important here?
Actually, let's say we want it just to cover all the bases. Let's say we don't want to show overlapping. We don't want to show the same Pokemon to different people. How would you, I guess, alter your system for that? Maybe we could talk about it at the very end, or we could talk about it now if you think.
Let's just do it right now. So the main problem with not showing overlapping, or the main adjustment to not showing overlapping Pokemon for different regions, is adjusting how our data works here and how our set of values here. So we designed for an overlapping set of things where we will serve the same Pokemon to the same person, and that necessarily complicated how we're doing our checkout and check-in here. But what we can do instead is change how this is keyed. So right now we're just keying on the geohash so that we share data. We can key this instead on the geohash, or actually it would be this being keyed on geohash. So this, oh, that's not the right text box. Oh, that's not the right text box either. Where are you?
You can use tab maybe to like pick their text boxes.
Oh my god.
Oh,
Anyway, keyed by geohash. So this is what it originally is right now. We can instead key this by geohash
yeah.
and user ID. That way, we give each individual user their own set of Pokemon, and greatly reduce the size of things here. By doing this, it actually makes our problem a lot simpler. However, it makes our data scale a lot more based on our user load. But as long as this is a composite key and like we have, Redis proper, our memory database properly auto scaled based on the region, it's not too terrible. And like we can have these all go to different shards, and you'd never really have a hot shard because your users will be relatively uniform in how they're going to make their requests. You're not going to have one user generating millions of requests to their particular shard. And if you do, you rate limit them and prevent them from doing that. But that changes this here, so we no longer have a large set of data here, and we no longer have to select some subset here. We instead just like generate a generate n for the person and manage their data accordingly. We also don't have to do anything special with our encounter anymore because we're no longer managing things that can be shared among users. So it actually makes our encounter API a lot simpler. We probably don't even need to do any sort of management of who has checked it out anymore because we're no longer this text box is just gone. I don't know how to access it anymore. It's not down here. It's
Maybe
not
click
this
on
one.
optional. Let me see if I can get it.
But anyway, it doesn't actually matter. So
there we go. I got it.
Oh, you got it?
Yeah, if you click on like an image and then you press tab, you can tab to it.
Is it this one? Oh my god, I found it. Okay, yeah. So what I want to say here is like, I'm gonna remember to put borders on these when I actually do the. I'll probably just use the blob squares because that'll be a little bit easier. But yeah, you don't have to manage this checked out person anymore because you're the only person that could look at this, and so it's really up to the client to avoid abuse there. And I don't know, avoiding abuse is actually a problem that Pokemon Go struggles with a lot, and so you have to make sure to manage that properly. But yeah, it makes the data storing a lot simpler, and it makes the encounter a lot simpler. And the capture is also much simpler as well. You don't have to check that you're the checked out person, you have the encounter timeout, etc. You still need this encounter timeout probably because you want to be able to extend the availability of that Pokemon being there past its expiration time. But yeah, I think not showing overlapping Pokemon to people makes the model a lot easier.
Got it. Okay. So you said then there's one last API, I guess the capture API?
Yeah.
Or is the encounter cover it? Okay.
Yep. The capture API is really straightforward. Do you want me to design it for the new model or the old model?
We can do both, I guess.
We can do both. Okay, cool. So I'm going to design it for the new model first, since the new model is much simpler. The new capture model does two things. The first is it marks the particular Pokemon that was caught as expired. Oh, again, it takes geohash and Pokemon ID. And again, user ID is available because it's an authenticated session. So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to mark that available Pokemon as expired. Mark as expired. We can actually do this in either order. It has different different user experiences or different problems with how we would do this because we kind of want this operation to be atomic, but it matters not that much for how it works. But anyway, we'd mark it as expired and we would insert a captured Pokemon record for that user. The problem with the ordering here is if for some reason the request was interrupted in between these two cases, there's a potential for a person to capture a Pokemon and then not actually acquire it. And so I would probably want to lean more in this direction where we insert the captured Pokemon first and then mark it as expired. The problem with expiring second instead of first is or doing it second instead of first is somebody could capture a duplicate of a Pokemon. But in Pokemon generally, clones are not a huge deal, and like people definitely don't spend too much time building out clones of Pokemon because what's the point of having the same Pokemon twice? Um,
Yeah.
but again, like we have a Pokemon ID, so we could enforce that on our data store here that we never insert a duplicate key here, and so we could use a little bit of you know, your persistent data stores technology to prevent duplicate insertions. I know like not all key value stores have this, but we could also make the put to be idempotent here so that you know it's always going to insert the same data, so it doesn't really matter if we try and insert twice. But Dynamo has a feature where you can say like, if this key already exists, don't insert it, produce an error. If you're working with any relational store, pretty much every relational store is going to have like primary key constraints and that sort of thing to prevent duplicate insertions. So you don't really have to worry so much about the clone problem. I think the biggest point here is do the captured Pokemon first, such that like, you wouldn't want to capture Pokemon and then not have it be captured. We do have to do some validation here. Like we have to make sure that this particular Pokemon ID is inside this geohash and like it's not past the encounter timeout, and produce some sort of error message there. And I think from the client side, you would probably want to retry this API until it's successful because it is, a idempotent. We can do that in an idempotent way. And so, either put this or post this. Based on whatever verb you want to do.
Got it. And then in the capture Pokemon record, is the capture ID, is that a reference to the available Pokemon, or is that a different ID?
So the available Pokemon is entirely ephemeral. For capture ID, again, we could use this Pokemon ID here, so we could have it be the same UUID as this one. Pretend I can highlight this one as this one here. I actually think making it the same ID is useful here because it allows you to solve the like clone problem pretty nicely. It doesn't actually matter what the capture ID is though, but having it be the same as the available Pokemon, solves one of the user problems that we would do, or that we would encounter there.
Got it. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's the end of the technical portion. Do you have any questions for me or anything you want to ask about?
So usually I would, but I actually know all the answers here. But for chat's sake, I would usually say something like, so what sort of team size are you working with? Like, what does your management structure look like? How do you prioritize work? What sort of say does an individual have in the organization? What and again, I wouldn't ask all these same questions to one particular interviewer. I would space them out amongst my several interviews so that I get kind of this breadth of knowledge as things go on. I'd probably also talk about like how disagreements function at an organization, try and get a gauge of like the toxicity of the org, try and figure out like, I wouldn't explicitly say toxicity because you don't want to be like, so how shitty is it to work at such and such company? But it would be kind of thinly veiled questions to ask, like how particular things function in an organization and how it moves forward and that sort of stuff. I would also probably ask a little bit about like what somebody's favorite or least favorite thing is about their company. Again, that one's a bit of a cliche question, but I find that the way people answer it can often tell you more about how their org functions than they necessarily would tell you verbatim. I always found as an interviewer that was the hardest one to answer because it would be like, man, there are some really shitty things here that I don't want to tell people about, but also like sometimes it's really nice to be able to talk about like, I can leverage leadership or like show how I was able to work with teams, a bunch of different teams, or like organize a bunch of stuff, and like, I don't know. I think the biggest important part to get out of the questions at the end is to ask for culture and try and get a more straightforward answer about how things are actually functioning at an org. What do you think about the end questions? I always feel like they're kind of a crapshoot, and
yeah, I think asking a good question can help your interview, and asking no questions or a trite question can actually hurt it because it doesn't seem like you're invested or actually like thinking about the right things. asking someone their favorite thing or least favorite thing can come off as trite. So I think it's important to phrase it a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I generally ask like more of the same things. Tell me like in the next like 3 to 6 months, what is the biggest bet for your team? Or tell me about an outage that your company had and how that happened. Then you can find out if they have a blameless culture or not. You know,
Blameless, right?
yeah. Well, there's what guardrails their company has for outages and various things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Outage
I
one is
haven't
good. I'm
actually.
definitely gonna steal that. You get to see how much of a dumpster fire things are.
I sometimes, as an interviewer, ask that. But yeah, I'm trying to think what other things people have asked me. They ask me about culture. A lot of people ask about tech stack. I find that can also be kind of superficial because, as long as it's not COBOL, like it's probably okay. But I try to drill into like, yes, we have CI/CD, we have microservices, we have like XYZ, even if people aren't asking that directly. And people also ask me about my specific team and how our system is built, and I give some insight into that. But yeah, cool.
What's the
Awesome.
worst question that someone's ever asked you as an interviewer? I know I have some pretty bad ones.
Question.
I had a dude ask me once if there were any women on the team.
Okay. Well, was it in the context of diversity, or is it the context of someone being like weird?
No, it was in the context of like skeezy white dude.
That sucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's rough. I haven't had any sort of candidate. I mean, yeah, a question at the end of the interview can really, like a question like that is pretty bad to ask. But at least, it helps the company understand the kind of person that they might be working with if they hire that kind of person.
The other bad one that I've gotten is somebody asking salary to an engineer.
Oh, like asking you how much you make or how much they would expect.
Both.
Yeah. Well, that one, I mean, they asked the recruiter that, so like.
Yeah. I've had ones where they asked the recruiter that, and the recruiter told them nothing, so they just asked each of the interviewers.
Yeah. That's funny.
There's a good answer to that though. It's always, I'm looking for a competitive salary for, role that you're looking for. So, staff engineer, etc., or like senior software engineer, or whatever you're looking for. Depending on your state, you can actually ask. You can ask your recruiter, and they are legally required to give you the salary bands for the position you're applying for. So, like, I know California has a law around this. There's a law in what's the other state? I'm losing the name of the state. Brain forget. But yeah, like that's a question that you ask to recruiters and not to engineers.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many negotiation tactics, and like you could say, I'm looking for a salary that's to measure it with my roles and responsibilities, and I'm really excited about the company, and I'd love to talk about salary more if it gets that far. Like you just defer it, and I would say use resources like levels.fyi, Glassdoor, and so on, market rate of engineers of like your level or area, and negotiate and ask for something that's higher than you might be actually satisfied with, and then you would negotiate down. And don't feel guilty for negotiating. It's totally fine. You're exchanging your time and effort for a salary, and you shouldn't be ashamed of that.
Cool. Well, is there anything else you want to talk about, Matt?
I could give you like maybe a post brief on this question, how I think you did. So for the,
this is the part where we failed chat. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, what?
I was saying this is the part where we failed chat. But no, go ahead.
What? I haven't been looking at chat. Is there anything chat is asking?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't been looking at chat either. I'll look at that later.
Okay.
There's a couple that are saying Pokemon GO doesn't work this way.
Yeah, they joined the interview late because I said, hey, I haven't played Pokemon GO, but this is the style. I mean, I could have said something like treasure hunt.
Oh, sure, yeah, we could have made it completely generic. Yeah, it's fine, but yeah.
Yeah, but I know you're obsessed with these children's games, so.
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt again.
That's cool. I'll put Pokemon GO, but not really. So we talked about what I do, and about yourself. I think for that you could be a little bit more concise and just stick to maybe your like last role and the things you worked on there.
Mhm.
Uh, I think for the past project as well, you did a good job of talking about the overview. I think you can talk more about like your specific role and the challenges. So for this question, like to be honest, I don't know what every interviewer looks for when they ask this question, but I use this as an opportunity to gauge seniority and level,
Mhm.
especially as you go like senior staff. This question is a way to really show the interviewer what like that your background is commensurate of these titles.
Mhm.
So have you dealt with ambiguity? Were you working cross org? Were you working cross team? Were you working only within your own team? And even for less senior candidates, it's still a good way to show that like you can, you know, own things end to end and ship it successfully. I think for this question, you could give a stronger answer by describing some of the challenges. Like you could say, some companies have completely avoided Python altogether. They have no faith in the Python ecosystem because the 2 to 3 migration has all these issues.
Mhm.
And you could counter and say like, well, actually, I built this tool that completely automated the problem with only one minor incident. I've continuously like you could focus on how tools like pre-commit PyUpgrade, rewrote Python imports, and so on that are
Yeah.
completely open source have like made this completely seamless. And then I think also it was good that you talked about getting buy-in from directors, and you could talk more about setting the timeline and agreeing to things, and you white gloved when necessary, but most of the time it wasn't necessary. So I think that can really help you stand out with a question like that.
Yeah, I think I wanted to
Um,
avoid some of that because because I don't
I,
necessarily want to give all that information away to random strangers on the internet watching my stream. But yeah, I completely understand that.
oh, sorry. Well, don't they already know that you wrote these tools?
I mean, they know about all the public tools, but they don't know about all of the like internal difficulties dealing with directives and prioritization and all the
Oh, I see.
nitty gritty details there. I would have elaborated more on
Got it.
those because I think those are actually the most important part of that.
Yeah, I don't think. I think the level of detail for speaking to directors is sufficient. Like most engineers are never going to talk to a director outside of like a joining the company, having like an initial one-on-one.
Hmm.
So yeah, but again, like you could highlight the engineering difficulties and how you were a multiplier and help people solve these. Um, for the technical part, I think you did really well. I actually, again, have no calibration on this question. I haven't asked it to anyone, but I think you did a really good job anticipating issues, like talking about details, identifying failure cases. Um, I think the parts where you could have improved a bit is I don't know if it's the nature of virtual interviews or not, but potentially more systems diagrams. So saying like this is the service, this is the database, and so on. So like being more visual instead of text focused.
Hmm.
Although the text is very useful to outline the failure cases.
Yeah, I
You
definitely
could
want to use more
also
blobs on an actual whiteboard. This is actually
you
the
could
first
also
time I've done
highlight.
a digital interview, and so dealing with that is definitely something I need to improve on.
Yeah, you could even buy a whiteboard and point your screen to it, or like use some sort of tablet. But yeah, I think overall, like all the information was there, and I could follow it. I think you could have also highlighted like maybe opportunities for extensions. So things like generate a set of Pokemon. Uh, that could be a completely different team or service focused on things like retention, prioritization, like encounter history, whatever, and that could be like
Hmm.
its own service. So I think you could have called out like this could be another component.
Hmm.
I think you solved the problem in a clear way. We talked about all the failure cases. I think if you made available Pokemon like a first class object in the database instead of this sort of like nested set, you could have like two benefits. One is better observability and tracking. So you could keep track of like we generated Pokemon at this time, it was caught at this time, it had like this many encounters and so on.
So you can kind of
Another
see the
thing is
lifetime there. Yeah.
yeah, also like any sort of metadata you would need, like type and level and whatever,
Hmm.
could be stored in its own unit. I think also the that also lends itself to the second point where you split out this time-based eviction policy service or database into two, where you have one that's kind of like just all the Pokemon and when they expire, and then like a second one which is each Pokemon's ID and its metadata, and that has its own expiry.
Hmm.
That makes it a little bit easier to like, for example, if you need to mark an entry as expired, you don't have to get like the whole set of all the Pokemon.
Yeah, you
I don't
couldn't
think
just
in
do it one
Reddit
at a
you can
time.
kind of connect nested items like in a set. You might have to know, you might have to like reference the whole blob in its entirety to be able to make any changes to it.
Yeah, that
Uh,
does often make things difficult. Although in that case, I thought like the data set was small enough that it wasn't a huge deal to deal with that. And especially when we're doing per user, like you're probably dealing with 10 entities, and so like a set of 10 entities is pretty tiny. I did also address this directly, so I was saying like, this is not actually that much data, and so it probably fits within
yeah,
a read capacity unit. And it's not actually that much of a class. But yeah, it is something to consider there. The other, and
yeah,
again, I didn't state this, but I was thinking in my head, so probably some advice to everyone is like talk about all the things you're thinking about. Sometimes there's just too much in your head to talk about everything, which is probably one of the cases here. I was actually trying to optimize a lot for cost on
mhm,
not storing it in a persistent storage because like memcache can be a lot cheaper to run than a key value store where you're actually persisting all your data and dealing with like um, encrypted values, backups, consistency, and like all of your all of your replica sets and all that other stuff. Whereas with Memcache, you can kind of run it a lot more cheaply. But yeah, storing it persistently actually solves a lot of the thinking bits of the problem. And if you're at a
yeah. I think
sufficiently
you did a
large company, you have infinite money, and so like cost is usually not a problem. It's more about the user experience.
yeah. Yeah, I think you also did a good job of like balancing the details versus the big rocks. You mentioned things like CCPA, GDPR, um, other details related to.
I also talked about
Yeah,
fraud and
I'm just
like ways to abuse the system
yeah,
and like rate limiting and those other things which are useful to touch
authentication,
on.
things like that. Yeah, I would say like you know you could like it's good to sprinkle them in. I would say just like don't rabbit hole too much. I think you did a decent job balancing that. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, awesome job.
Cool. Well, thank you for doing this, Max. This was really awesome and gave
No
everyone in
worries.
chat like a good way to see how things kind of run for those that hadn't seen something like this before. I think this was pretty representative of how they kind of go. Again, like I was a little sparse on early details because I don't have an NDA with everyone in chat, and like the end we
Yeah,
kind of skipped out and did a little fourth walling on how we kind of strategized for the end follow up questions. But I think like the technical portion in the middle was pretty much how all of them run.
yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Take care, dude. See ya.
Yeah. Do you want to if people can ask you further questions, can I tell them that you can answer them on Discord, or like what do you want to do there? We can just answer them in stream chat, and either Max
Yeah.
or I can address them.
I will probably log off. I guess if people ask questions in stream chat, maybe you could take it. And
Okay, yeah,
I'm
I'll
on the
handle them then.
Discord, so if you can ask questions there.
Cool, awesome.
Okay.
Well, thank you for
Yeah.
stopping by, Max. This was really awesome. And I'll
Yeah. No
talk to
worries.
you later.
Good luck with your job hunt.
Yep, you too.
Yeah.
Oh man, I said you too like a fucking weirdo. That's not what I meant.